Hi and welcome back to a new video on my channel. Today I want to talk about a topic which is quite interesting in my opinion. And because this channel is called Real Life Apps, I want to try to show you real life architectures instead of using simple code to explain the concept of Nuxt. So this video is a bit more advanced. So if you don't really know how to use the Nuxt API and the network layer of Nuxt, then maybe get familiar with that before we go ahead here. But if you want to know how to set up a scalable and more better approach for your app and you want to go big, then maybe this video is the right one for you. So, um, I guess in most of your or most of the tutorials you watched, you have seen most of the time something like this. So in the video, when they explain, hey, how to use the API or do API call to an external API, most of the time they use fetch and hard code the string, for example. This is totally fine. But as soon as you want to write a scalable app also for production, um, in my opinion, this is not the right way to write correct network code. And for that, I will show you today a concept I built for my own. So it's not super complex, but it's easy scalable. So especially also for Nuxt. And it doesn't matter if you use SSR or no SSR, it works for both. So, how does this work? First of all, what we have here when we go back to our app view here, at the end we will have something like this. So the use lazy async data is also a composable provided by Nuxt. I prefer to use this one. You also can use the use fetch, use lazy data and whatever they also provide. I'm a huge fan of this one. Because of that, I'm using use lazy async data in that case. And as you can see, I'm not calling a string or anything else. I'm saying, okay, please call the user service.get. What is the user service? So the user service is an extra class which contains all my logic for the user endpoints. We can jump into it. Let's try it. Jump. Oh, I guess I have to. Yeah, sometimes this is not working, but let's go to it through our services, the user service.ts. And inside here, you can see the user service is extending an API service. And this is the first core concept, that when you write a service which is connecting to an external API, create an abstract class which includes all the batteries you need to write this network layer. So let's jump into this API service first. And this API service here, as you can see, contains a fetch API class. We will talk about that. And also a constructor. And you will understand why we have the structure here in a few minutes. So the idea here is now to go from the very bottom to the top of this logic, so that you have seen all the classes. And this API service, as I said, contains the fetch API. The fetch API is a wrapper class around the ofetch package provided also in Nuxt, which I create to wrap the logic of the fetch API, which is, in my opinion, a bit annoying to use because you have to repeat yourself most of the time. So what I did is to write a wrapper class which accepts some options. The for also the same options which are provided by auth-fetch, and some helper classes like post, get, put, delete, also a raw function which is important for cookies. So, for example, HTTP only cookies. I'm talking about this topic on a different video on my channel. You can check that out, how to implement HTTP only cookies with SSR in Nuxt. So basically, this fetch API class is a simple wrapper around the fetch API of Nuxt. So what we are doing here is we are getting some options. We're passing the URL, and we spreading the options here, the basic, so the global options, which we are providing here. So these options are always added to each of these functions, and you can also provide some custom options when you need them in a specific case. So nothing special. So how do we continue? To make use of this fetch API, we have to write our client first. Our client is the core of all this logic. So let's start with that. The client API, you can call it like you want. I'm calling it most of the time client API, is the one which is combining all these logics. That means, as you can see, we defined our user service here. You already have seen. And we also define our fetch API here. So now what you can see here is this client API's constructor accepts some fetch options. That means we can set up we can set up global options for our client, which we can reuse on different places. So without setting it up for different requests all the time. So we set it up once, and then we can reuse these informations all over our services. And how do we do that? We do that by making use of dependency injection. And now, what we are, maybe when you remember again, as you can see, we pass this API object, so the fetch API object, directly into our user service. That means we do dependency injection. So the configuration here is passed to our user service, and our user service has to care anymore about the options and the settings and the routes and all that stuff, or the base route. He only has to call the endpoint, and that's it. So let's jump quickly again into our user service to check this again. So as you can see, he's jumping directly into the API service. Because the user service is extending this API service. And as you can see, we set up this client here. This client is a fetch API. This is this one in that case now. And this one, as I said, we're talking about this constructor in a few minutes. This one is the constructor here, which is accepting this newly created instance. And when we now go directly to our user service again, here it's extending that, you can directly now call this client.get. So this client here has now all the information we need, the base URL, the headers, and whatever we need to set up our connection to the external API. And the service here doesn't have to care anymore about that. The only thing we have to provide is obviously the path to the endpoint. The base URL is defined here, the headers are defined, and all other options. And this is something you can do for all different services. Let's say you have now, let's say, an auth service. It's not defined obviously now, but when you now create an auth service with the endpoints which are pointing to the auth service endpoints, you can do the same here. The auth service extends the API service, and then we are combining all here again and say, hey, this user service is of user service, and which accepts again the API, which is again dependency injection. The good thing about this fetch API dependency injection is that you could replace the package you are using to do these calls easily. For example, if you decide to use Axios, because Axios is more customizable and also has better support for interceptors. This is sometimes what I like to do to use Axios instead of OFetch. You can easily replace the logic here with Axios. So that means you don't have to rebuild all your network layer because you have this wrapper class. You can change it easily here. You can import Axios. You can change the function calls here. And the configuration stays the same for, so the user services and the other services doesn't need to care about how this post function, get function works internally. So you can change the internal logic, but the user service, inside the user service, you don't have to change anything because of dependency injection. So, and this is basically how it works. So we have our client API, which defines the services. In that case, we have only the user service. The user services are extending an API service, which defines the overall structure for the user services. Basically, the API service has a constructor which accepts the fetch API, so that we can make use of dependency injection. Sorry. And inside our client API, we can create now a fetch API object with our configuration and pass this configuration to our services. That's the basic idea. So the cool thing now here is, because we have composables in Nuxt, we can now make use of this class here by creating a composable, which is called useClient. This useClient here is setting up our client, and we can use that later on. I can show that in a few minutes. And inside here, you can set up your cookies and whatever. As I said, you check out my HTTP only video about cookies in Nuxt. You can get the token, the API base URL. And now what we are doing here is we say, okay, please set up our API. So we have here our new client, which you have seen here with our user service and whatever. We set up the base URL, we set up our headers, and these informations are now passed into our services via dependency injection. That means if we add a new header here, all our other services will automatically have this new configuration, which is good. And we don't want to set this for every different service, right? And at the end, we return our client API. So, and to make it a bit more clear, and this is something I prefer to do, you don't have to do that, but my last step to use these services is to create a user service composable, which wraps our use client or is doing a request to our SSR. It depends how you want to work with your network. So if we do, or if you use SSR, so you do a request to Nuxt, to the Nitro server, which is doing the request then to the external API, then you usually use still fetch here. So it's quite simple, nothing changes here for calling the Nitro server. So you call the Nitro server, which is calling a root inside our server folder here. Or if you don't want to use SSR or you want to do the call directly from the client, then you can make use of this use client composable. And as you can see, we get the client, and with that we can make use of our user service, so client.userservice.get. And to come back to this SSR, if you use SSR, we're doing this one here inside our server. So that's the only difference here. So instead of doing the call directly inside the browser of the user, we are pinging the Nitro server, which is then calling this piece of code, which we are calling here as well. So This is basically how you write, in my opinion, a structured and scalable and also flexible network layer. It's still simple but effective. So, and as soon as you want to do your requests, you can use here a use user service and then make use of the composables of Nuxt, use lazy async data, and do your request. So hopefully that helped you a bit to understand how to write a more proper network layer. And if you have questions, please ask me in the comments, and I will answer all your questions. If you also have some ideas how to improve that, please feel free to comment as well. And yeah, that's it. And hopefully, I could show you a bit more. I could show you a bit more about real life apps and how they work. So, because that's the idea on the on this channel. Thanks, and see you on the next video.